If you're looking for a bit of extra travel for your 2007 to 2021 Tundra's front suspension, this extended travel CV axle will be for you. Whether you just want some extra flexibility for off-roading or overlanding, or if you've got a lift on your truck, this will give you a refreshed OEM style axle with all new joints and boots, but it will also give you a little bit of extra wiggle room. Now, the dark side of lift kits is that the extra height adds extra stress to your suspension and driveline, especially your front axles. More height means more angle for your CV joints, and they're just really not meant to run like this all the time. So that can cause premature wear. Now, that same thing can happen if you're taking your truck off the beaten path a lot and you're working those axles hard. The solution here is a physically longer axle that will provide you with more travel, and that's exactly what we've got here. This is going to work on your truck anywhere from stock height up to 4 inches of lift, so even if you haven't lifted your truck yet, this will work for you. Now, this is again going to be similar to your stock axle, but there are a few key differences. The main one is the bearing-driven plunging center bar design. So this has more movement on both the wheel and differential side and will allow it to compress a bit in both directions. There are also high-speed 8-ball joints on both sides, giving you up to 47 degrees of motion, which is quite a bit more than your standard axle. Now, that's going to translate to additional articulation and movement in the suspension to account for that additional lift kit height or whatever terrain you might be encountering. But this is again going to fit right in place of your factory original axle, so you don't need to do any other modifications to your truck in order to have this fitted. Now, these axles are sold individually, as you may have gathered, since I only have one up here on the table with me. This is definitely something you want to do in pairs, so make sure you're getting 2 when you put this in your cart. As you may have guessed, the construction here is also very similar to your OEM axles, just beefed up a little bit. You get those uprated high-speed 8-ball joints and the bearing-driven plunging design we were discussing, as well as heavy-duty boot clamps to keep everything in place. Everything is packed with high-temperature resistant grease for additional friction resistance too, but the main parts of it are going to be basically just like your original axle. Pricing comes in at about $350 per axle, and again, these are sold separately, so make sure you're getting 2 when you buy. Now, that price point makes this more of a premium option within the market, but if you're looking for additional flexibility and the peace of mind that this can provide you, it's worth the price of entry. Installation gets a 2 out of 3 on our difficulty meter, and the job should take you around 3 hours to complete. This is again a totally bolt-on installation that doesn't require any other modifications to work properly, so while there's quite a bit of disassembly required, it is a straightforward process. We're going to walk you through the installation process step by step right now, so for that, let's head on out to the shop.
Alright, for this install you will need a pry bar, a 1/2-inch breaker bar, a flathead screwdriver, a 19 and a 17 mil wrench. You will need a 10 mil, a 12 mil, and a 19 mil 3/8 drive socket, a 19, a 22 1/2-inch drive socket, various types of swivels. This is a 1/2-inch swivel, 24 mil socket, a special axle socket for the axle nut, a puller for the various ball joints, 3/8 drive ratchet, also another 3/8 drive ratchet. You'll need a caliper hanger, a 1/2-inch impact gun, a regular pliers and a side cutter pliers, a mallet, and a hammer. And not shown on video, you will need a floor jack and jack stands. Today we're going to be installing a front CV axle on our Tundra. Let's get started. Alright, now that we have our wheel off, we are going to start by removing our brake caliper, but first we're going to remove our 12mm bolt that holds on the bracket for our brake line, so we can get that out of the way to make it easier to hang the caliper off to the side. Alright, now that's out of the way, we're going to move on to our brake caliper. Alright, now we're going to use a 19mm socket to remove our brake caliper. I switched over to a 19mm socket on a 3/8 ratchet to make the removal of the bolt a little bit easier. All right, while holding that in place, you can now gently remove that assembly as one. And you can use a caliper hanger tool to hook that out of the way. Next, you're going to want to remove the rotor and set that off to the side. Next, you can come in here and remove the connector for your wheel speed sensor, remove the protective cover, and then pry down and remove that clip. And there's a couple plastic locking tabs holding the wire secure. You can move that out of the way. That should give you a little bit more room to work in this area. All right, next you're gonna wanna come in and remove the cover for your hub assembly so you can get to the axle bolt. Just use a pry bar and gently pry up all around sides. And that should come off, revealing your axle nut. Next, you're gonna wanna remove your cotter pin. You can use any pliers to bend the tabs out of the way so you can pull it through the other side. And move your axle nut cover. Now we're gonna remove our axle nut with our axle nut socket with our impact driver. All right, next we're gonna remove our hub assembly bolts. They are a 17 millimeter nut. We're gonna use our wrench and break those loose. All right, now that we got that nice and loose, you can remove that and the backing plate will come with it. It might fall on the ground, but that's okay. Just remove that. And then you want to remove your rubber O-ring with it. All right, now we're gonna move on to removing all of our cotter pins from our castle nuts from the upper and lower control arm and our tie rod. Just gonna use the pliers, bend them out of the way so we can get to them easier. Now we're going to use our 24 millimeter socket to remove our castle nut off our tie rod and our castle nut off our lower control arm ball joint. Now we're going to use a 19 mil on a swivel socket so we can get the upper castle nut off. All right, we're going to remove our 2 lower control arm bolts with our 22 millimeter socket on our impact. And there will be some tension that gets relieved. Just be careful of that. All right, we're gonna move on to removing our tie rod from our hub assembly arm. We're gonna use our separator tool. If you do not have one of these, you can pick one up from a local auto parts store. Just thread that onto the top there, insert a ratchet, and begin pressing. I like to leave the nut on here so in case it does go flying, it'll always catch itself right there. All right, now we're gonna repeat the same process for the upper ball joint for the control arm. I went ahead and put back a lower bolt just to hold the hub assembly so it doesn't fall anywhere. All right, that popped down and the nut caught it there so it doesn't fall on anybody. All right, once we have the upper ball joint out, we can remove that. And slide it out of the way. Add it here, adjust our positioning. There you go. All right, you're gonna have some fluid leaking out. You might wanna get a bucket to catch any of that and then just pop it straight out. All right, now we're gonna install our new axle. The first thing that I like to make sure is there is a little gap on this tension spring. I like to keep that downward to fight against gravity. When we install, remove our rag that was collecting some fluid. We're gonna wanna get this straight inside there. Be careful of that seal. All right, we might need a mallet to tap this in. Just make sure and protect your threads a little bit by backing out that nut. All right, once you get that fully seated in and lined up, you can now make sure everything is on there. Take the nut off, and then we can install back our hub assembly. All right, now we're gonna install our hub assembly. We're going to temporarily place it into the axle and also temporarily put our upper control arm and thread on our castle nut to temporarily hold that up there. And now we can feed our axle in and have it sit in place. All right, we're also gonna install our lower control arm bolts to kind of hold everything together. All right, we're just gonna put in a couple threads and then we're gonna come back and tighten that up. All right, next we're gonna put our O-ring back onto our hub assembly. And this goes on before the backing plate. And now you can take your backing plate, lay it on, and push one bolt through, hold everything together, feed it through your axle. And once that's through, you can actually take your new hardware, thread it on, just to keep everything from falling. You may need to turn your hub assembly and adjust it properly to line up your new bolts. Get our bolts lined up. And we can tighten this down with our 17mm wrench. All right, once you have all these tightened down, you want to go back and torque these down to factory specs. All right, now we're going to tighten down our axle nut. Should pull everything into place. We're going to use our 1/2-inch impact with our special socket for our axle nut. All right, after that's tightened down, we're going to want to go back and tighten that down to factory specs. All right, now we're going to install our retaining cap. Just make sure and get one of the crowns lined up so we can get our cotter pin through. Cotter pin. And bend the tabs. All right, that's on there secure. Now we're gonna put on our cap. All right, now we can install our dust cap and gently tap that on. Want to check around, make sure it's all fully seated. Should be good to go. Now we're gonna install our tie rod. Place our castle nut, thread that on. We use our 24mm socket to tighten that down. And we're gonna go back and want to torque that down to factory spec. All right, now we're gonna install our cotter pin. All right, now we're gonna install our lower control arm bolts and tighten them down. This is a 22mm socket on our impact. All right, once we got those tightened down, we're gonna wanna come back and torque it down to factory specs. All right, now we can go back and install our lower control arm ball joint bolt with our 24mm socket. Try to get the crowns lined up so you can get your cotter pin in. All right, once you have that lined up, you're gonna wanna go back and torque everything down to factory spec. Install our cotter pin. All right, once that's in there, just make sure it's out of the way, not touching any of the backing plate components. All right, now we can install our top control arm castle nut. Tighten this down with our 19mm socket. Try to get our crowns lined up. And then we're gonna want to torque that down to factory spec. All right, now we're gonna install our cotter pin. All right, once that's fully seated, should be good to go. All right, now we can install our brackets for our wheel speed sensor back onto the upper control arm. Tighten that down with our 10mm. All right, now we can install our rotor and also install our caliper. Once you get everything lined up, you can then thread your bolts in. All right, now we're gonna install our caliper bracket bolts. Thread the bottom one in, move on to the top. And once you have that started, a couple threads, you can then tighten it down. 19mm socket. And then you want to go back and tighten that down to factory spec. Now we want to install our brake line bracket to our hub assembly. Tighten that down with our 12mm. All right, now you're gonna wanna go back and thread in your wheel speed sensor back into the retaining clips. Once that's in there, you can then plug in your wheel speed sensor, clip that in, and then clip on the retaining shroud. All right, now that we have our axle installed, we are going to need to top off our diff fluid. The fill plug is all the way up here, tucked behind a couple components. We're going to use a 10 mil hexagon socket to get in there and break that loose. And then we're just going to unthread that. I like to use a socket to get in there. And then we're going to fill with the appropriate fluid. All right, now that we have the plug removed, we are going to use our diff fluid filler to get in there. You can use whatever siphon or orifice you need to get into the spot. And then you're gonna fill just enough to where it runs out in a thin, steady stream. All right, now that we have a thin, steady stream coming out, we're gonna wanna put our plug back in. I like to use a socket for this. All right, we'll get our ratchet and tighten that up. All right, now that that's tightened, you want to wipe off any excess fluids. Make sure everything's torqued down to spec, take it for a road test, and then check your levels again. All right, once you have everything torqued down and all your cables are tucked away and connectors are placed on, you can then repeat this exact process for the other side. All right, that wraps up our install for our extended travel CV axle for the front on our 07 to 21 Tundra. Just remember, for everything Tundra related, keep it right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.